Someone in your group has stopped breathing. You are standing over them. Their chest is still. Their eyes are open, but they are not looking at anything. A few minutes ago, this person was alive. They were a voice, a pair of hands, a face you had known since you were born. Now they are something else, something you do not have a word for yet. You are a Homo sapiens living somewhere in the Levant roughly 100,000 years ago. There are maybe 25 people in your group. One of them is now lying on the ground, and every person present is looking at the body, and nobody knows what to do next. That moment, that pause, is one of the most important moments in the entire history of our species, because what happens next is not obvious. It is not instinct, and for most of the history of life on this planet, nothing happened next. An animal died, and the body stayed where it fell. Other animals ate it, or it decomposed, or the weather scattered it, and that was the end. But you are not going to walk away. Something in you will not let you. And the decision to do something with this body, instead of nothing, represents a cognitive leap so enormous that we are still living inside its consequences today. Here is where the story starts. Not with ritual, not with grief, not with the afterlife. It starts with chemistry. A human body begins to break down almost immediately after death. Within minutes, a process called autolysis begins. The cells of the body, no longer receiving oxygen, start to digest themselves from the inside out. Enzymes that were contained within cellular membranes leak into surrounding tissue and begin dissolving it. Within hours, bacteria that were living harmlessly in the gut, roughly 38 trillion of them, begin to migrate into the bloodstream and soft tissues, consuming the body's proteins and carbohydrates and producing gas as a metabolic byproduct. This is when the smell begins. The specific compounds responsible are cadaverine and putrescine. These are diamines, organic molecules produced by the bacterial decomposition of amino acids. They are among the most potent olfactory signals in the natural world, and humans can detect them at concentrations measured in parts per billion. The human nose did not evolve this sensitivity by accident. The ability to smell death at extremely low concentrations is a survival adaptation, because a decomposing body is genuinely dangerous. Within 24 to 48 hours in a warm climate, the body bloats visibly. Gas, produced by bacterial metabolism, inflates the abdomen and soft tissues. The skin begins to discolor, shifting from its living tone through green, then purple, then black. Fluids begin to leak from the nose, mouth, and other openings. Insects arrive. Blowflies can detect a dead body from over a kilometer away, and they begin laying eggs within minutes of landing. Within a day, the body is colonized. This is what a dead group member looked like to an ancient human, not a peaceful figure lying in repose. A body that was visibly, audibly, and overwhelmingly changing into something unrecognizable, generating a smell so powerful that it triggered deep neurological disgust and attracting exactly the kinds of animals that the group spent every waking hour trying to avoid. Because here is the practical problem that nobody talks about when they discuss ancient burial. A dead body near a campsite is a security threat. The smell of decomposition does not just repel humans. It attracts predators and scavengers. Hyenas, which have one of the most powerful olfactory systems of any terrestrial mammal, can detect carrion from kilometers downwind. Vultures can spot the behavioral patterns of scavenging animals from altitude and converge rapidly. Jackals, wild dogs, large cats. A decomposing body near a group of sleeping humans is an open invitation to every dangerous animal in the region. The first time an ancient human moved a dead body, they may not have been performing a ritual. They may have been solving a problem, and this may be the oldest layer of the behavior. Not reverence, not grief, sanitation. Getting the body away from the living before it attracted something that could kill them too. But here is where the story goes somewhere nobody expects, because the oldest evidence we have for deliberate body disposal does not come from Homo sapiens. It comes from a species that predates us by hundreds of thousands of years, and it comes with an object that changes everything. Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. Deep inside the Cueva Mayor cave system in the Sierra de Atapuerca region of northern Spain, at the bottom of a 13-meter vertical shaft, archaeologists have recovered the remains of at least 28 individuals. They are Homo heidelbergensis, an archaic human species, and they date to roughly 430,000 years ago. That is more than 100,000 years before the earliest known Homo sapiens. The bodies were not scattered. They were concentrated at the base of the shaft, in a pattern that is extremely difficult to explain by natural accumulation. There is no evidence that the individuals died in the pit. There is no evidence of flooding or natural trapping. The leading interpretation, championed by the paleoanthropologist Juan Luis Arzuaga, at the Complutense University of Madrid is that the bodies were deliberately dropped into the shaft by other members of the group. But here is the detail that elevates this from disposal to something else entirely. Among the bones, the team recovered a single hand axe. It is made of red quartzite, a material not found locally, meaning it was carried to the site from somewhere else. It is beautifully crafted. The researchers named it Excalibur, and if it was deliberately placed in the pit alongside the dead, it is potentially the oldest grave good ever found on Earth, 430,000 years old, made by a species that was not us. If you are watching this and it is changing how you think about where we come from, subscribe to Footprint Zero. We cover the parts of ancient human history that nobody else talks about. Now, the Excalibur hand axe is debated. Some researchers argue it may have fallen into the pit accidentally or been carried in by water action. The taphonomic evidence, the science of what happens to objects and bodies after deposition, is genuinely ambiguous. But even if the hand axe is a coincidence, the concentration of 28 bodies at the base of a single shaft is not. Something was happening at Cima de los Huesos that goes beyond abandonment. Whether it was ritual, reverence, or simply a consistent practice of depositing the dead in a specific place, it represents a behavioral pattern that no other animal on the planet has ever exhibited. And then came the Neanderthals, and the evidence gets harder to ignore. La Chapelle aux Saints, a limestone cave in the Corrèze department of southwestern France. In 1908, three brothers, Amédée, Jean, and Paul Buissonnet, discovered the nearly complete skeleton of a Neanderthal male buried in a shallow pit dug into the cave floor. The body was in a flexed position, and the pit appeared to have been deliberately excavated to receive it. For decades, this was cited as the clearest evidence of intentional Neanderthal burial. Then it was challenged. In the 1990s and 2000s, researchers argued that the pit might have been a natural depression, that the preservation might be explained by natural sedimentation rather than intentional covering. The taphonomist William Rendu led a re-excavation of the site in 2011 and 12, and his team concluded that the burial was indeed intentional, that the pit showed tool marks consistent with deliberate digging, and that the body had been covered rapidly enough to prevent scavenging. The debate continues, and this is actually the point. Proving intentional burial in the archaeological record is extraordinarily difficult. You are looking at bones and dirt and trying to determine whether another being placed them there on purpose, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago. The evidence is always ambiguous, but the pattern is not. Across dozens of sites spanning more than 100,000 years, Neanderthal remains are found in positions and contexts that are difficult to explain without some form of deliberate treatment of the dead. La Ferracie in France, with its cluster of Neanderthal burials, including infants. Kibara Cave in Israel, where a Neanderthal was buried with the cranium deliberately removed. Shanidar Cave in Iraq, where multiple Neanderthal individuals were deposited in what appears to be a communal burial area. And then Homo sapiens arrived, and what had been a quiet, ambiguous practice exploded into something unmistakable. The burials at Kafzeh Cave in Israel, dating to roughly 100,000 years ago, include individuals interred with grave goods. Red deer antlers were placed in the arms of one burial. Ochre, a red iron oxide pigment that has no nutritional or practical value, was applied to the bodies. At Skull Cave, just a few kilometers away and dating to a similar period, a burial was found with the mandible of a wild boar placed in the hands of the deceased. Think about what this actually means. Someone looked at a dead body and decided that the body needed something. Not food, not water, not shelter. An object. Something symbolic. Something that served no survival function whatsoever. The cognitive distance between moving a body to avoid attracting hyenas and placing a boar jaw in the hands of the dead is almost immeasurable. It is the difference between solving a problem and creating meaning. And then, roughly 34,000 years ago, at the site of Sungir, near Vladimir in Russia, the practice reached a level of investment that is staggering even by modern standards. Two children, estimated at roughly 10 and 12 years of age, were buried head-to-head in a single grave. Their bodies were covered in more than 10,000 mammoth ivory beads. Each bead, according to experimental archaeology estimates, took roughly 45 minutes to carve and polish. That is over 7,500 hours of labor. For beads, for the dead. The children were also buried with carved mammoth ivory spears, ivory animal figurines, and fox teeth ornaments. The total labor investment in this single burial represents months of full-time work by multiple people. In a society where every calorie was hard-won and every hour of labor had a direct impact on group survival, the resources poured into the Sungir burial are almost incomprehensible. If this video has shifted how you see the ancient world, hit the like button. It makes a real difference in getting this kind of content to more people. Nobody does this for sanitation. Nobody invests 7,500 hours of bead carving to keep hyenas away from camp. Something had changed. Something had shifted in the way these people understood death, and it had shifted so profoundly that they were willing to sacrifice enormous amounts of time, labor, and material resources to mark it. What changed? The social psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pyszczynski developed a framework called terror management theory, first published in 1986, that offers one of the most compelling explanations for why humans treat their dead the way they do. The theory argues that human beings are the only species that is fully aware of its own mortality, and that this awareness creates a psychological crisis so fundamental that it shapes nearly everything we do. The anxiety produced by death awareness, according to terror management theory, is managed through two mechanisms. The first is self-esteem, the feeling that you matter, that your life has value. The second is cultural worldview, a shared belief system that provides meaning, order, and the possibility of some form of symbolic or literal immortality. Burial, ritual treatment of the dead, grave goods, ancestor veneration, all of these are expressions of a cultural worldview that says death is not the end, that the person who died still matters, that they continue in some form. The question for ancient human history is when this awareness emerged, and the burial evidence suggests it was not a sudden event, it was a gradient. The bodies at Cima de los Huesos were disposed of, consistently, in a single location, maybe with a hand axe, maybe not. The Neanderthals at La Chapelle aux Saints and Shanidar were placed in pits, possibly covered, possibly with objects. The Homo sapiens at Kafse placed antlers in ochre with their dead. The people at Sungur invested thousands of hours in adornment. Each step is a little more intentional, a little more symbolic, a little more costly, and each step reveals a mind that is a little more aware that the person on the ground is not just a body, they are an absence, a hole in the group that will not be filled. And not everyone was buried the same way. This is the part of the story that gets missed in the popular version. Burial in the ground was never the only option. In some populations, the dead were exposed on elevated platforms or placed in trees, a practice known as excarnation or sky burial, allowing birds and weather to strip the flesh from the bones. The clean bones were then collected and sometimes reburied in a secondary burial, often in a communal ossuary with the bones of other group members. This practice is documented ethnographically across multiple continents, and there is suggestive archaeological evidence for it, extending deep into the Paleolithic, though organic platforms rarely survive in the archaeological record. At some sites, skulls were deliberately removed from burials and treated separately. In the Natufian culture of the Levant, dating to roughly 12,000 to 15,000 years ago, skulls were plastered with clay, given modeled facial features, and sometimes inlaid with shells in the eye sockets. These plastered skulls were kept in living spaces, displayed, handled, and eventually reburied. The dead were not gone. They were present, physically, tangibly present in the daily life of the living. Cremation leaves even less evidence, but charred bone fragments consistent with deliberate burning have been found at sites dating back at least 20,000 years. At Mungo in New South Wales, Australia, the remains known as Mungo Lady, dating to roughly 42,000 years ago, show evidence of cremation followed by the crushing and reburning of the bones. This is not accidental fire damage. This is a multi-stage process that required sustained effort and attention. Every culture that has ever been studied did something with their dead. Not the same thing, not for the same reasons, but something. The universality of the behavior is itself the evidence. No society has ever been documented that simply leaves its dead where they fall and walks away without acknowledgement. The impulse to act, to mark, to ritualize, to do anything other than nothing appears to be as fundamental to Homo sapiens as language itself. Go back to that body on the ground, that person who is breathing and is not, those open eyes. You are standing over them, and you do not know what happens after death because nobody does. You do not know whether the person you are looking at still exists somewhere. You do not have a religion yet. You do not have a philosophy. You do not have a word for soul, or spirit, or afterlife, or God. All you have is the fact that this person was here, and now they are not, and everything you feel is telling you that walking away is not enough. So, you do something. You dig, you carry, you cover. You place something beside them that mattered, a tool, a tusk, a stone you carried from far away. You do it not because it will help. You do it because not doing it is unbearable, because some part of your brain, The same brain you are using right now to hear these words has crossed a line that nothing else in the history of life on Earth has ever crossed. You are aware that you will die, and you are choosing, in the face of that knowledge, to insist that it matters. That is not instinct. That is not survival. That is the beginning of everything that makes you human. Every cathedral, every tombstone, every eulogy, every candle lit in memory, every name carved in stone is a direct descendant of the first time someone looked at a dead body on the ground and refused to leave it there. You are still doing it. 300,000 years later, you are still standing over the dead and insisting that it matters. And there is a reason we covered this topic right after our video on ancient blindness. Because what you are starting to see across all of these stories is that the thing that made ancient humans extraordinary was never their strength or their tools or their technology. It was the decision to stay. We have a video on how ancient humans survived a broken leg that takes that idea even further, and it is worth your time.